Welcome to our Thursday evening self-healing class. I can't see the number of people who are here because I now know that people are watching on the other platforms as well. So if you're watching on Instagram or Facebook and you'd like to join the Zoom because there's time for questions and answers afterward, just send us a message now and we will connect you. And if you're interested in being part of our community, let Jimmy know and he can put you on. We have an email list which will keep you up to date, and we also have a text list. Tonight's lesson is around overcoming addictions, and in Louise Hay's book, You Can Heal Your Life, she spoke about addictions. And I'll also add that I've been talking about addictions since 1980. I also, along the way, because I was involved in a personal recovery myself, I was interested enough to study at the University of Miami, and eventually I got a master's degree in addiction science. So I'm a therapist as well as a minister and other things, and the whole subject of addiction has always been of interest to me, to say the least. And more interesting is spiritual recovery. And Louise Hay touches upon a little bit of that. And I probably could go on in this subject and actually teach a class on it, but I want to go through some things that we have a lesson on this subject, and I spent a few hours on it, and I thought, my goodness gracious, I could do a whole class series on this. But let's go to, first before I start Louise Hay's part of it, I pulled up a copy of the 12 steps. In this case, it was AA. But I also am aware that there's dozens of other types of spiritual healing programs for people with a myriad of addictions. And there's probably addictions that people don't even know of. One could be, there's groups for people who have a tendency to just reflexively be angry. You've all met them. You know people who are really hot-headed, and it's kind of like a learned behavior. There's also groups for people who, especially now, especially after COVID, people spend a lot of time online, and you've all heard, we've probably all done some times in our life where we have over-shopped. Well, now it's become a chronic issue because, you can be on eBay or Amazon or 1,000 other websites and just get that gratification of buying something. And while there's nothing intrinsically wrong with buying something, it's sometimes people buy more than they need and oftentimes more than they can afford. And so there's addictions regarding how people handle money and debts, and there's Debtors Anonymous, and there's also groups for people who are in destructive relationships, and they can be for people who are, you can be either the person who's being the person who is the person who's abusive, or you may be on the other end of it where you're the person who stays in bad relationships. And why would you stay in a bad relationship, you might ask? It's because people do oftentimes. And then there's a whole group of people, there's really, again, I could go on for an hour or two on this, but it could be, there's issues around smoking, there's issues around food, a lot of issues around food. Every kind of thing, taken to excess. So Louise Hay talks a little bit about it. All of the 12-step programs, and I'm not suggesting that anybody has to go to a 12-step program to deal with the issues that they have, but I will tell you that they're very powerful and they can be helpful if someone's life has gotten off track to the point where the particular thing they're doing could be abusive relationship, it could be something with their drinking or smoking, it could be anything. There's a time where you really got to stop because it's gotten entirely out of control. In all of the 12-step programs, the first step is we admitted that we were powerless over the addiction, right? And that our lives had become unmanageable. So when I'm going to talk about behaviors tonight, the thing to ask yourself, and it might be someone in your family, a child, a nephew. I recently lost a niece 2 years ago, 28 years old, to addiction. If you see it, you've got to, hopefully you say something about it. Because when people are in these places, they're in denial. In fact, they call addiction across the board the disease of denial. It's like we keep doing it and we keep doing it. And even though we may know that whatever it is not for our highest and best, there's a tendency and a propensity for people when they're in a circle like that, looping around, to keep doing it until something really bad happens or until someone intervenes. So I'm not going to read all the 12 steps, but that's really the most important one, because we're all spiritual students here. And we know we have great power at our disposal, right? Everybody here knows about the power of mind, and we have the ability to change. And even though the whole history might be really bad about any particular subject I'm going to talk about tonight, or you may think of things yourself as I'm speaking, I'm going to tell you, you have the power to turn it all around. You may not believe if you're in a bad situation right now, with your weight or with your relationship, or you might think you're in hell. And I'm here to tell you, you do have the power to turn it around. The second step in the program is where you wake up spiritually and you come to believe that there's something, a power, within you that's greater than you. So we're connected to spirit, right? That can restore us. So its first step is becoming honest and admitting that there's a challenge, a big one, right? Oftentimes, or sometimes a small one, but still, you've got to acknowledge it if you intend to do something with it. And then you come to the realization that there is power and you can be restored, and you can, all of the universe actually supports you in getting on track, as I know was true of me. And then you do something very dynamic, born out of being honest with yourself and coming to believe that there's power and spirit available. You're going to then make a decision to turn your life over to that and to the care of that. So that's the intro to the 12 steps. I invite anybody to look at them. And if you have anyone in your family, your extended family that is going through some area, I'd always recommend that you reach out and start talking about it. One of the things about addictions is people don't talk about their problems that way, because there's usually shame associated with overeating, or there's shame associated with acting out in bad ways, or I don't want to say bad because it should be thought of more of as an illness rather than a badness. But there's shame, If you've gone through financial ruin, I know some of you have, or you've gone through a tough time, this isn't a time to condemn yourself for anything. It's just a time to recognize that you've made mistakes, and we're all here, we're all human, we make mistakes, right? So this is a time for compassion. There's a little checklist that came from Louise, one of Louise Hay's, what do you call those, companion books. And she called it an addiction checklist. I want to feel better now is the first thing, okay? If you're a person who really wants to feel better now, and or you might tell yourself smoking cigarettes reduces your stress. Or you might say, I can't stop eating. I'm always eating too many carbs. I'm always eating too much. Or another one, if you think drinking makes you fun, or if you think drinking makes you more interesting, or you don't think you can go out without having a few drinks because who you are is not enough and blah, blah, blah. Another thing on her checklist, you're striving for perfection in everything. And usually that's a dead clue to the person doesn't really feel adequate because you're always trying to overcompensate. If you're shopping way too much, if you're gambling too much by your own estimation, if you're spending too much money by your own estimation, and see, you're the one that's doing this to you. That's the reason I say by your own estimation. Or you just habitually head out to the bar every night after work. It's what you automatically do. It might indicate that you're developing a habit that's going to get you in trouble. I can think of a couple people, they come to mind very quickly. They're always saying they're going to have a couple of glasses of wine, wind up drinking a bottle or two. These are all things that, loads of people I've known in my life have done. When we're doing any of the things we're doing, so we find ourselves gaining more and more weight, or we find ourselves not speaking up for ourselves in relationships, when we're doing things secretly and we're having shame, right, or guilt, that means we're in denial about it, and yet on some level we know. You might find yourself taking a pill or an extra pill to calm you down. And if you're taking a pill and it's prescribed, that's perfectly fine. But oftentimes people don't take medication as prescribed. If you find yourself, again, you seem to can't stop yourself from buying things. It could be clothing, it could be collectibles, it could be exercise equipment, it could be anything. It'd be an indication, I'm not feeling okay, so I'm buying all these things. It could be cosmetics, it could be anything. So on some of these things are perfectly okay, right? But people cross a line with it. And especially with money, spending money, you can do it now online 24 hours a day. I have a person I know well that started liking antique dolls. Next thing I knew, there were 300 of them in her collection, and she couldn't pay her rent. So it happens. People's habitual spending have made Jeff Bezos the richest man on the planet Earth, or at least in America. So you see how this goes. So there's all kinds of addictions. Again, I mentioned, because I used to be a therapist, I saw people in abusive relationships, and if it were a woman or a man, it didn't matter. They would tend to go from one relationship to the next, and they would always be attracting the same type of person. It's like they had inner radar that attracted it. And of course, as a metaphysician, I understand how that happens, because there's something within them that's looking to heal. And so if you don't heal it, if you don't get at the underlying pattern, you're going to bring it right back to you until you eventually transcend it. Many of you have stayed in relationships, have been in bad relationships, or have stayed in them for far too long, and you know if you have, and hopefully you've made a powerful decision not to do that again. Behaviors, we all have had behaviors that work against us, right? And you might not think of them as addictions, but what it is, it's a repetitive behavior that you have that works against you. So, again, there's a lot of people who get a lot of mileage in their life by being angry. It's like the first response. They're not capable for some reason, or they haven't developed the capacity to think it through. One of the sayings from AA is, think the drink through, or NA would say, play the tape through. Because if you think it through, if you have the capacity to not just react and respond, you have great intelligence that can work for you if you're able to think through. So I've known a lot of people. When I was younger, I would be a little bit of a hothead that way too, where you react. You're going to be fighting when there's no real reason to fight. People like this have been fighting their whole lives, and you don't have to. You don't have to. I guess I'll ask the extended audience out there on Instagram and Facebook, are you one of these people? Are you reacting, right? Because you have power that you can learn to use. If you are, you're allowing your self-esteem to plummet if you're always in reaction. And you undoubtedly are hurting yourself, and most likely you're hurting other people too. And I'm not talking about this subject tonight to punish anybody, because if we're doing these things, we're punishing ourselves. I've dealt with a lot of people over the years with weight issues, had a lot of clients. I've had weight issues myself. It's particularly hard getting a handle on the subject of food, because you've got to eat to sustain life, right? But there's, as we educate ourselves, there's kinds of foods and ways of eating that won't spike our blood sugar and keep us in this vicious cycle of being hungry and eating and craving more. So there's a way out of many of these addictive behaviors. As we educate ourselves, at least as it turns into food, you can learn about nutrition, and you can learn what triggers much of this type of behavior. I'm sure some of you can relate to some of this. I'm not advocating tonight that everyone or anyone go to a 12-step support program, but I'm going to give you a list of a few of them. I took the time to jot down a few for you today. There's AA, there's NA, there's Al-Anon for the family members of everyone who's impacted by the people who are actively involved in any of these areas. There's Cocaine Anonymous, there's Debtors Anonymous, Overeaters Anonymous, Food Addicts Anonymous. One I found in the 1990s, around 1990, was Codependence Anonymous, where I find that in teaching religious science, there's a lot of people who have grown up in families, and even as adults, they don't know who they've come here to be. You don't even know what makes you happy, because all your life you've been trying to make other people happy. So through Coda and Melanie Beattie's magnificent book, Codependent No More, which was my little Bible around 1990, you learn to develop an authentic sense of self. You learn what makes you happy, because you've spent your life trying to please mommy or daddy or, others, your husband or your wife. So Coda is a really particularly good program, and the book Codependent No More really helps people establish boundaries and a greater sense of self. Though I will tell you, if you stay with our teaching week by week and plug in on Thursday nights, we will be doing the same work with you. Well, we're always about learning to love yourself. There's other programs specifically for people who have compulsive sex and or love addictions. So there's a load of people out there I've met in Manhattan. I've gone to groups, beautiful people that are just looking for a sense to be filled up and a sense of validating themselves through a lot of compulsive sexual activity. And the flip side of that coin is what we call people who are always falling in love with the wrong people. So there's programs for that. There's another one for Emotions Anonymous, and for people who are dually disordered. And any and all of these programs can be helpful. Our Thursday night class and what we teach, I think, is a wonderful, supportive type of class for anybody who's dealing with any kind of addictions. And Louise Hay commented on it in a couple of her different books. She suggested, take a look at the behavior itself. Addictive behavior is simply another way of saying, I'm not good enough. So I need to go and fix this, improve that. You're measuring yourself against Madison Avenue. You're finding yourself being deficient in your looks, or you think you're too old, you think you're too fat, you think a lot of things. And it's just another way to criticize yourself and put yourself down. When we're caught in this cycle of behavior, we're not good enough, we're not good enough, we're running from ourselves, or we're acting out in some way, and we're reacting most likely, and that becomes a habit. So if you're habitually getting yourself fixed up and revamped and trying to be something that you're not, and if your own opinion of yourself is you're not good enough, you don't look well enough, it's all a form of self-hatred on some level, or not loving yourself enough. And it can be deadly, carried to an extreme, and it can be harmful to others as well. Most of us have been through some of this type of things on some level, hopefully not extreme, or you've seen your own children, your cousins, as I say, my niece 28-year-old girl 2 years ago. So we've all been impacted, and then we have our own things, all of us, that we still need to work with. When any of us are acting out with anger or taking something to help us chill out, we can't be totally in touch with our feelings, or maybe we don't want to deal with our feelings. I, this afternoon, was reminded of a friend of mine, Alan Vandenbroder, who's now passed away. He was working for me in the early 90s. He was really a nice person. He was really smart. And, I was involved in metaphysics and in recovery. And I was learning to be a therapist. And he said to me one day a line I'll always remember. He says, "I'm not like the rest of you in New Thought, Greg. And I'm not in spiritual recovery. I don't want to deal or feel the things that I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to deal with that kind of pain. And I don't want to walk through it." So Alan's way was seeing a psychiatrist a couple times a month, and he was usually heavily medicated. When there's a person who's in pain, in a lot of pain, something has to happen, right? Because it's either, it's not going to be a good outcome. Something Louise Hay said, there's something that they're believing or saying is so painful, any kind of behaviors might take place. And addictions sometimes are innocent. I can think of another person close to me who had a back injury, and she started taking pain medication, and she was a professional. And much of her past, decade and a half, she's spent on the couch because she started shopping for more medicine to deal with pain. There's a tendency for people to overeat, to drink a bit too often, to act out with compulsive behaviors of all kinds. And all this boils down to a need to love ourselves more, approve of ourselves more. I know that people on this call, myself included, have been on this journey for many, many years. And the thing is, we have the power to change it, but I don't know that you do it alone. I know it's important to talk about it. As I said, all our secrets, are the things that will get us in trouble. Jacqueline Small wrote a book years ago that said all of our battered places need to be brought to light. So, God doesn't make junk or bad people, but we have stuff, right? And if we have shame and we can't talk about it, then that inner dialogue you're having is not pretty. I speak every week and I ask, what's the inner dialogue been like with the most important person in the world? And some of you, I'm fine. You may say you're fine, but deep down inside, you're really very critical of yourself, and you're not really being nice to the most important person in the world. So that's the type of thing that needs to be changed for the better. When I used to start out in this whole recovery journey, I remember everybody saying, okay, well, we have the disease of denial. And what that essentially means is we don't really want to admit we have a problem. I'm fine. I'm a religious science student. I'm whole and complete. Well, that is the truth. But if your inner dialogue is not lining up with that, then there's work to do. Part of the work we do here, we've introduced a new process called the Q process, which you've all heard of. Ask the question, who have I come here to be? I would hope you've come here to be healthy and whole and to express life and to do so with great vigor and enthusiasm. And I really hope that's true for everyone on this call. Then what's preventing us from doing that? So you flip that cue card over and there's the shadow, the flip side of that question of who I've come here to be is all those defeating thoughts and behaviors. It's great to say I've come here to express life in abundant, but if you're in a relationship where you're battling with somebody day after day, or if you're stifling your own creativity in some way because you're overdoing something, that doesn't make you a bad person at all, but it really is a call for you to become aware that you're working against yourself in some way. So this is why we're talking a little bit, about the things we might be doing that could be hurting us. So I know a lot of you on the call, at least in the Zoom, and I know a good number of you have been on a spiritual journey for a long time, and you wouldn't trade this journey for anything in the world. You sign in religiously every week as often as you can because you want to be reminded of the truth of who you are. And if there's something that's going on in your life that's incongruent with this greater life that we're sharing in, I would bet, knowing most of you, that you're going to deal with it. You're not going to be like my friend Alan, who doesn't want to deal or feel. You would want to deal with it so you can move through it and past it, because you have the ability to conquer it, to move through it and past it. So I'll go on to Louise for a moment longer. She said you have the ability and the power within you to conquer addictions of any kind or any type of compulsive behavior. You have the ability also to stop worrying. And boy, that's a big one because people worry. You have the ability to get past that as well. You must first realize, you got to step out of denial. You must first realize, okay, I've got a challenge. There's a problem, a challenge. You got to get to the place, we want to get to the place where our life starts to work for us. So we want to be honest about what's going on. I have in my notes, I recall in 1980 when I began this journey, someone saying to me, it's my first year into a recovery program, that the universe's will for you is to be happy, joyous, and free, to thrive. You're here to be happy, joyous, and free. And at the time, I was full of it. What I mean by full of it, I had so many stories, like, oh, this is wrong, and that's wrong, and nobody understands, and woe is me, and ain't it awful? I mean, that was, if you knew me in 1980, it was a lot of that going on. And I had really, really strong opinions about how life should be. Now, I've been teaching this class for like 25 years, so most of that stuff is gone. But I really was a force, and I wasn't a force for good. I was strongly opinionated and just full of stuff, right? So, thankfully, I found, unity and science of mind and AA and Louise all within a few years, and they've been part of my arsenal and my quiver ever since. I was definitely a person who was a malcontent, meaning not happy with life on life's terms. Can any of you relate to that? Sometimes, though, as awful as your negative experiences have been, those states of consciousness have the potentiality of being great stepping stones to move you forward. Because when it gets bad enough and for long enough, you just might face yourself and learn to take a step up and step out of it. For a number of years, I was always living a life suffering consequences. I mean, if you drive drunk a few times, you're going to get arrested. If you're lucky, you're not going to kill yourself or other people. I went through consequences of those types of behaviors. And most likely, as I was going through them, I'd be blaming it on the conditions of the road. I'd be blaming it on everything, except I wasn't really taking much responsibility for any of it then. The underlying truth for people when they're going through anything like that is they're not feeling good about themselves, and I can remember that I was not. What I know now is I was creating it all, every step of the way, and that's what Louise would say to you, that we're each 100% responsible. It doesn't connotate a shred of blame, because you're operating with what you know. You're creating what you create. Ernest Holmes and Louise Harte taught us to begin to trust the process of life, affirming that all is well, and to keep doing that until we get there, until we can get to a place where we feel safe. The power of your own mind is extremely important when it comes to issues of addictive behavior. If you tell yourself, I can't stop this and I can't do that, no one wants me, it's too late for me, I can't stop cheating, I can't stop drinking, then you will definitely continue. Or if you're in a terrible situation, you find yourself embarrassed and you don't reach, and you're operating with shame, and if you don't reach out, and if you don't talk about it, you're just keeping yourself in hell. This is the thing to understand as a metaphysician. All of life, spirit itself, this was from Emerson, is conspiring for you to awaken. The dice of God are always loaded. It's all unfolding for you. And I hope some of you can hear this message now. Even the most heinous things in them have the potential to turn everything around if you approach them honestly, right? And you have the willingness. From the AA program, they used to say to me, willingness is the key. Willingness is the key that opens the door to everything. So as you're able to face things and walk through them and hopefully talk about them with a trusted person or two, perhaps a professional, you'd be amazed before you're halfway through of how great things can begin to happen. But it requires you, staying the course. Let's see what else I have that might be of interesting. Okay, so the big thing here is to come to realize in this class, no matter what the behaviors have been, we've come here to live in freedom and not in hell. So tonight's class is a reminder that if there's anything going on, it's time to fess up, talk about it, and move through it. You didn't come here to get caught up in some vicious cycle of addiction and living with guilt and shame, and you didn't come here to be impoverished. You've come here to thrive and prosper. Louise Hay wrote one of the most successful books of the century, as you all know. You Can Heal Your Life. There's been no other book that's had that kind of success that I've ever heard of. She deals with all the addictions, and her words will help you get through them. My experience with addicted persons have shown me that most people, Louise Hay said, have some degree of self-loathing or self-hatred. And people are really, really rough on themselves. So this Thursday class I've been doing for over 2 decades is always a reminder to be nice to you. Change that conversation around with the most important person in your world. Your conditioning to be critical started when you were a child, and it's been going on ever since. So you really want to disrupt, blow up, neutralize, whatever you have to do, any of the negative self-chatter, any of the chatter that says I'm inadequate, I'm too old, I'm too stupid, wherever you go that you're critical of yourself, this is the conversation that you want to interrupt and begin using affirmative prayer or get the help you need to stop that conversation. So this could go on for another hour, so this is probably a great place for me to wrap it up. The important thing I want you to think about for those of you who, I'm sure I've hit a few nerves here, if not among you in the Zoom call, but and the hundreds of people who listen throughout the week. There's an old saying, we are only as sick as our secrets. So with that, I want you to know there's nothing wrong with you. If you're holding on to stuff like this, so it's time to bring it to light and know that all the universe supports you in moving past everything and anything so you can live in glory, light, happiness, and joy. And you are not alone, ever. So I guess that'll be it for the moment. We'll have a 1-minute break and we'll be right back to hear your thoughts. Thank you.